Good morning, everyone. I'm Yolanda Cooper, and I serve as the Dean and University Librarian at Emory. And I want to welcome everybody to day 3 of Emory's Symposium on Slavery and Dispossession. We want to start our day with a prayer, so I want to invite Lynn Pace to the podium.
Good morning and welcome to Oxford College. Welcome to those of you here in person and welcome to those of you who are watching online this morning. My name is Lynn Pace and I'm the college chaplain here at Oxford. Let me first thank Yolanda Cooper and Carol Henderson and the steering committee and probably many others who are not named or I'm not naming who are working behind the scenes for the work to bring us together for this important and meaningful time in this symposium. I'm glad to be here and to be involved. I also wish to thank all those who have opened our time together with blessings, dance, readings, prayers, and more over the last couple of days. I'm especially grateful to my friend in her pink this morning, Reverend Dr. Avis Williams, for all that she has shared with me about her story and its connection to Oxford and Emory in the last decade or so. I'm grateful that she'll be offering the closing blessing this evening for this symposium. Let me invite you, as a way of our prayer this morning, to find a comfortable position wherever you are right now, whether it's here in person or online. And as you do that, think about what is immediately below your feet. What's the substance immediately below your feet, wherever you are? Carpet, wood, concrete, the earth. And may it help ground you to the earth. And may it help connect us to one another. Now, when I'm asked to settle into a comfortable seated position, I like to place my palms up. Sometimes I close my eyes. Sometimes I focus on something in the distance so much that it becomes blurry. And then I breathe. Now, we always breathe, right? We always have the breath with us. We take it everywhere we go. But I mean intentionally breathe. So I'm going to count to 3 and ask you to take a breath and then to let it go. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. In and let it go. And as you settle into that breath and you keep breathing, let me tell you a brief story. My story is about Mr. John Pliny J.P. Godfrey, a resident of Oxford, Georgia, who died just in the last year, who was the son of John P. Godfrey Sr., who was born in Oxford, and the grandson of Mr. Israel Godfrey and Mrs. Sally Sims Godfrey. Israel Godfrey grew up here in Oxford and was in part a stonemason. And in his work and in his enslavement, he helped build many of the buildings at Emory College, the campus where we hold this symposium today. After a long career elsewhere, Israel's grandson, JP, and his spouse, Mary, moved to Oxford in the 90s and became active residents of this city, where JP helped restore, in part, where he helped restore the Oxford Historical Cemetery, especially the parts of the cemetery with African-American graves and graves of enslaved persons. In 2002, while clearing the site with then Oxford College professor Dr. Mark Auslander, who's here and who gave a wonderful presentation yesterday, JP talked about his own father. From Dr. Auslander's book, The Accidental Slave Owner, come these words from JP. He never told me anything about our family history, no matter how hard I tried. Proud man would never say a single word about slavery. That's what we came up from, you know. That's how they thought then. Except right before he died, he told me something for the first and only time. He told that his father, my grandfather, had been born and grew up in slavery just here in this county, and that he and his full brother Stephen came off the old Cody place. But my grandfather hated old man Cody, so he took the name Godfrey. But Stephen kept the name Cody. So all these Cody buried here, they're all my cousins. But I only found that out from my father at the end. I had the privilege of knowing J.P. Godfrey in his last decade here. He came to my Understanding Community course, just like Avis has, to speak to the students. A couple of them got to interview him. He taught them about his life, about Oxford, and what's so important is that he shared his story. A story too often not told in a history, and a story he had to piece together. Friends, we are here to know more deeply, even as we are deeply known by the one who has created us. What we bring to this space, our own stories, is important. The ways in which we have missed the mark, the ways in which we have not gotten things right, in my tradition, we call this sin, is important. What we receive from this time together can help us make a way forward and connect us deeply for transformation of self, community, Emory, and in society. These days of this symposium bring heavy subjects, and it's important to share our stories. For it's through our stories we build relationships. And through it all, it's important to remember to breathe. For perhaps you already know this, but the word conspire literally means to breathe together. So I invite you again, take a breath in and let it go. Friends, you've launched a conspiracy. We are launching a conspiracy as we share and receive each other's stories. A conspiracy for a new way forward together. May you be blessed on this final day of the symposium and in this place where Emory began, so that you will not only share your story, but hear the stories of others, past and present. May you be blessed and inspired to do good in the world, so that those to whom love is a stranger will find in you, indeed in all of us, a generous friend. Again, I say welcome to you and welcome to Oxford College.
Thank you. I want to offer a land acknowledgement. Emory University acknowledges the Muskogee Creek people who lived, worked, produced knowledge on, and nurtured the land where Emory's Oxford and Atlanta campuses are now located. In 1821, 15 years before Emory's founding, the Muskogee were forced to relinquish this land. We recognize the sustained oppression, land dispossession, and involuntary removals of the Muskogee and Cherokee peoples from Georgia and the Southeast. Emory seeks to honor the Muskogee Nation and other indigenous caretakers of this land by humbly seeking knowledge of their histories and committing to respectful stewardship of the land. Thank you. I want to now invite Dean Doug Hicks to the podium.
Good morning. I want to add to Chaplain Lynn Pace's thank you to Yolanda Cooper and Carol Henderson and to the committee for their remarkable work to bring together this symposium on slavery and dispossession. And the last day and a half have been fantastic, and we are glad to welcome you to all to Oxford College. Emory began here, of course, in 1836. And it is fitting that we hold a significant part of this symposium on this campus. It's not only fitting, it's critically important for understanding the past and for moving forward together. The hopes and dreams to train Methodist clergy happened here, but it was a severely limited vision tainted by what President Lincoln called America's original sin. As we know, the early trustees, presidents, and most faculty members owned enslaved persons. All were deeply entangled in that institution of slavery. And as Yolanda Cooper noted, these lands were originally inhabited by the Muskogee peoples. 10 years ago, the executive committee of Emory's Board of Trustees made a formal statement about the university's ties to slavery, saying in part, Emory regrets both this undeniable wrong and the university's decades of delay in acknowledging slavery's harmful legacy. As Emory University looks forward, it seeks the wisdom always to discern what is right and the courage to abide by its mission of using knowledge to serve humanity. Much of this conference is about continuing to acknowledge and understand this shameful history, knowing that only by fully naming the institution's past actions and attitudes can we continue to strive to fully embrace justice, equality, and inclusivity. The title of this symposium also includes the words, "and the journey toward restorative justice," in recognition that the past continues to impact our society, our university, and this Oxford College. Yesterday, Emory's president, Greg Fenves, challenged us with a question that is fundamental to how we continue to move forward. How do we reconcile that the same Emory University that is hosting this symposium is also the same place that marginalized human lives and benefited from oppression? His answer was that we must continue to ask difficult questions to reevaluate and undertake the work and reflection necessary to improve, to change. Here at Oxford, Emory's original home and vital part of its future, we continue to take those steps while openly acknowledging that we must do more together. We must do better. We rededicated Phi Gamma Hall 3 years ago. That hall was built with funds raised by students and likely built by the hands of enslaved persons. Yet the only name recorded with the construction of the building is one Mr. Hires, who was contracted to build it for $3,750. We don't know whose hands built Phi Gamma Hall. The names of laborers, enslaved, and perhaps students or others are unknown. Few Hall is also antebellum, and same thing was likely built, given our place and our institution, and the institution of slavery was likely built with the hands of enslaved labor. There's also a soldier's cemetery back in the woods, just to our west and south. This campus was a hospital for the Confederacy during the battle for Atlanta near the end of the Civil War. And those dead whose families were too far away to come fetch their bodies of these young men were buried here with their names in that quiet cemetery of about 20 that is here on this campus. We must name these painful parts of the university's history, of our history on this college campus, honor enslaved persons, and commit to our continuing work. And we have done some steps, and there is more to do. A modest plaque stands near Few Hall to honor the lifelong work of two African Americans, Bob Hammond and Billy Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell was a direct descendant of enslaved persons here at Oxford, and they were, both Bob Hammond and Billy Mitchell were responsible, the lead people responsible for caring for this campus and these buildings for nearly a century together. And in 2019-2020, we marked what we called the 30-50 celebrations, 50 years since the first graduating class of African Americans from Oxford, and 30 years of Martin Luther King Jr. scholars. There have been a half century of African American graduates, over 1,000 Black alumni of Oxford College, but in a history of 185 years on this campus, these gains still fall short and came late. In our first session today, you will hear from a group of Oxford students who have studied Oxford's history and current student attitudes toward historical monuments on campus and in neighboring localities. We welcome their findings, observations, and recommendations. We welcome engaging in dialogue together to move forward together. Student engagement and activism have been critical to moving this college, this university forward in the past, and that remains critical at this moment. Next Friday, we will honor one of Oxford's earliest African American students who during his time on this campus and on the Atlanta campus played a vital role in the formation of key student organizations. He became one of Oxford's most respected and beloved alumni, the late Judge Horace J. Johnson, Jr. His name will become the name of one of our most central and historic buildings. Horace Johnson was a pathbreaker in every phase of his life, one of the first students to desegregate Newton schools, and the first Black Superior Court judge in the Alcovy Circuit here, which includes Newton and Walton counties. He dedicated his life to public service, which is one of the fundamental values of an Oxford education. Because of his contributions to Emory and our community, Language Hall, which was built in 1874, will soon become Johnson Hall. This will be what I believe is the most prominent naming of a space that honors an African American at Emory University. And we are excited about this step and look forward to future ways of recognizing the contributions of remarkable alumni. The university also is in the process of planning twin memorials to enslaved laborers with a presence on both the Oxford and Atlanta campuses. President Fenves has appointed me and my colleague, Professor Greg Ellison of the Candler School of Theology, to lead that working group, to engage the Emory community and the local community, including descendants of enslaved persons, and to build consensus around a design concept. Professor Ellison is here this morning, and I asked him to join me to say a few words about the work of this working group. Craig, thank you for being here.
Good morning, friends. I'm so honored to be here with you to take part in this really important conference and to share just a few of the dreams that we have as a working group for this twin memorial. Chief among these dreams is engaging with the community, both those here at Oxford, those on the Atlanta campus, as well as those beyond our campuses. We had our first meeting of the working group just about a week ago. And in that meeting, we shared some of our collective dreams for this project that will live on long after our days here at Emory. I'll share just a few of those dreams with you that have been stated in an article that Susan Carini wrote in the Emory Wheel. Here are a few of these dreams. To tell a fuller story and truly honor those who will be acknowledged through these memorials. To make the memorials a part of Emory's curriculum, something that is integrated into the life, not only of the classroom, but in the programming that students engage in from their first days on campus. Establishing even deeper ties between the Oxford and Atlanta campus. A few more of these dreams. Demonstrating that Emory is a welcoming, safe space for our neighbors, our alumni, and even students beyond our campus walls. To help Emory students have a deeper appreciation of the university's past. And finally, to turn long-deserved attention to current campus workers, especially those who are oft overlooked and underappreciated. These are just a few of our dreams, and we look forward to engaging with you and those beyond this space to hear your dreams as we make this memorial something that will be a tribute to those who sacrificed for our behalf.
So I thank you for being present today, for participating in this symposium with its important work. We feel a deep sense of purpose to work together, not only with students, faculty, staff, but also community members. I thank Mayor David Eady for being present with us, the Mayor of Oxford, Georgia, for also joining us in this work together. We're not going to get there by ourselves. We're not going to get there just as community members or students, administration, faculty. We're going to continue to work for justice, racial justice, and other kinds of social justice if we do the work together. Today is just a part of that work that will be ongoing. So again, thank you to Carol Henderson and Yolanda Cooper, to whom I turn the program. Thank you.
Hello, we're just a few minutes from starting the programming, so I just wanted to go through a few logistics. Hybrid programming is available to accommodate those who feel safer in the virtual environment. We're accommodating both. Recording each session as we have permissions, so that if you miss a certain session, you can go back and look at it in the recording. For the concurrent sessions, we focus them on the focus of the symposium itself on 3 tracks: history, impact, and healing and restorative justice. So you can choose which track you want to go to, and it should be indicated there. Due to COVID-19 protocols, for a moderated yellow status, you must be masked, and there can be no food or drink in the sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and I think turn this over to our panel. I do want to say that it was intentional that we started each day with a student panel. This symposium was really initiated from student activism. So we wanted to acknowledge that by doing that intentionally. So welcome to our first panel discussion, the history of Oxford, where we are today, Oxford Men of Color, and Black Student Alliance.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I've never used a microphone before, to be completely honest with you, so hopefully this goes well. My name is Sarah Bekele. I'm a 2nd-year student here at Oxford College of Emory University. I'm an RA, and for people who don't know what that is, I'm a resident assistant. I'm also the president of BSA, so the Black Student Alliance. And I'm doing a joint major between linguistics and psychology with a minor in quantitative theories and methods.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Austin Barnes. I'm also a 2nd year at Oxford College of Emory University. I am also part of BSA, Afro-Caribbean Student Union, and Oxford's First. And I am planning to major in biology.
And hello, everyone. My name is Devin G. I'm also a 2nd year here at Oxford. I am a member of the Black Student Alliance. I'm a coordinator for Volunteer Oxford. I'm also the president of the Food Recovery Network. And along with that, I'm majoring in quantitative sciences and computer science. So I'd like to say that I'm happy to see everyone here today. We're definitely very honored to have the time to speak about a few issues that we feel like are especially relevant when it comes to a conversation about Emory and Oxford's history with slavery and dispossession. We've definitely been really impressed and really amazed by a lot of the presentations in the past few days, as we felt they provide like a really formal reflection on this legacy and history. But Sarah and I actually wanted to provide a less formal and a more personal account and reflection of a lot of these events. So with that, we wanted to speak a little bit more about our stories and how we got here today, and why we wanted to share some things with you all, and really take ownership in that So I will start off with my story. So I'm from Houston, Texas, and I've spent a majority of my life within the South. So being in an area with some presence of the Confederacy and a history of slavery is nothing new to me. And with that, my father made it as a special point to teach me a lot about African American history, the roles we've played in different areas, and really the struggles of our people so far, and how we ended up here today. So he really wanted to instill me with a pride in who I was and the community that I was in. So coming to Oxford, I had a general understanding and sense that slavery played some role into the creation of the university, but I was really shocked to what was actually here when I was first on campus. One of the first few things that I noticed when I entered this community was that both Oxford and the surrounding area seemed to be really divided based on both race and class. And that was something that was initially extremely shocking to me. And the next thing was that there were a lot of physical reminders from where Oxford really first came from and the presence around the community. So one of the first few things I did when I first got on campus, because of COVID, my first day on campus was actually move-in day. So I had never really been here, and it was kind of, it was definitely a large transition, but I definitely wanted to explore the surrounding area. And the first thing that I wanted to do, because I'd heard from students who'd been here previously, was explore a place called Covington Square. It's less than 10 minutes from here. So my family and I, we all got into a car and we drove quickly down to Covington Square, where there's a lot of shops and restaurants where we first started to walk around. So the first thing I saw when we got to Covington Square is actually this. Sorry, can I get help with transitioning the slides, please?
Try again.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So the first thing that I saw when I got to Covington Square was this statue. I first didn't think much of it, but my brother actually pointed out and read the plaque that says, "The Confederate Dead of Newton County." This was really one of my first few experiences here in this area, and immediately I started to think about, well, this is a bit embarrassing. My parents were now dropping me off in this new place that I was supposed to call home, and I was now supposed to tell them, yes, there's a Confederate statue right here in the middle of the square. And I know for my mother, who's like a lot of other mothers on move-in day, she was definitely very concerned about where she was leaving her black son, and having to tell her that, yes, I'm in an area with the presence of the Confederacy and all these other things was a bit difficult, to be honest. And I really started to question both how I fit in my place within this university and how the university itself reflected on the fact that a lot of their students were encountering these things so close to their campus. So this is really where I started to think about a lot of the things about, this was when I first really encountered Oxford's legacy and Oxford's history. And when I came back to campus, I wanted to start exploring and learning a little bit more about all of this. So the next thing that I did was walk along Oxford's nature trail, which Dean Hicks mentioned previously. And I found the cemetery, which is right outside the gym. And inspecting gravestones within the cemetery and also the monuments there, it mentioned that it was a Confederate cemetery, which was again quite surprising to me, as I didn't expect this to be something that was actually on campus. And without much of an acknowledgement there, I didn't really understand how the university reflected on having something like this right there on campus. And as a black student, I felt a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that we seem to be so proudly putting this forward. And it's not something that's hidden at all. Lots of students walk along the trail, and this is something that we encounter every single day, but there did never seem to be any sort of message about, yes, this is here, and this is how we view it. So I was just left on my own, essentially, to come to my own conclusions about how the university reflected on this. The next thing, continuing along the trail, is actually I got to the old church, which is just down the road, and behind the old church actually sits Kitty's Cottage. I know that has been something that's been talked about at the symposium, but just to give a little bit of context, this is right behind the old church, and it actually has a plaque, which I read initially. A plaque that reads, "Kitty's Cottage was built in 1842 by Bishop James Andrew for an inherited slave who could not be freed and still live in Georgia. Kitty preferred to remain with the Andrew family rather than be sent to Africa. In 1938, Kitty's Cottage was bought and moved to Salem Campground for safekeeping. In 1994, the board of Salem Campground offered to help move Kitty's Cottage back to Oxford. The city and the Oxford Historical Shrine Society worked together to help form the sacred treasure back home. It was placed behind Old Church near its original site and is now a museum. So beyond kind of the history of how it got there, I was first taken aback by kind of how it first presented the story of Kitty's Cottage. From what my father has told me previously from visiting the African American History Museum, I understood this to be already a very whitewashed story of what happened. And I was immediately very curious, what is the actual story of Miss Kitty, also known as Catherine Boyd, who actually lived within this cottage? So from looking at this very whitewashed and kind of neutered account, I started to wonder, is this what the university thinks of its history? Do they whitewash their own involvement in all of these things? I think that's really when I first started to take a more active role in investigating the history, because I started to understand it as something that may not be presented to students, but it is definitely an important conversation, as there's so many of these physical reminders. So that's what really started me on this journey. And the next thing that I really wanted to do was talk with other students to see their thoughts, to see their emotion with that. So that's really when I got into conversation with Sarah, so that we could end here today in front of you, but I will now allow Sarah to share her story with this.
Thank you, Devin. So my story starts similarly to Devin's. I was born in Houston, Texas, and I lived there until I was 9, and that's really where the similarities end for now. So when I was 9 years old, I moved to the Bay Area, California, and so for the past 9 years, I've been living in a culture that is very different from the culture that I'm living in now. But when I started looking into colleges, I realized that I missed the South. I missed the Southern hospitality. I missed, the howdies. I missed the y'alls. I missed the cowboy boots. And so I knew that when I started looking for colleges that I wanted to be probably around Texas or Tennessee or Georgia, of course. And when I toured the Atlanta campus, I did not tour Oxford's campus, unfortunately. But when I toured the Atlanta campus, I knew that Emory as a whole was a place that I wanted to be. And I knew at the time, since I was looking at Southern schools or established Southern schools in general, that Emory probably had some sort of history with slavery, but I didn't know exactly what that was. And so my story with it starts on move-in day, like Devin, and my mom had helped me unpack. She and I said our goodbyes, and I went to my hall dinner with my RA and all the other girls that were living on my hall. And after dinner, we decided that we were going to go on a little tour of campus. And as we walked past William Gym, which is on the right side of campus, my RA pointed down towards the nature trail and said, and over there is the Confederate graveyard. And I feel like probably there should have been a little bit more of an explanation as to what was happening when she said that. But I don't think that it was her place either to try and explain all of the history of Emory's campus to me. So the only explanation that I did get, any elaboration on it, was not to get drunk and try to dig up the gravestones because there were cameras there. So that was my experience with that. The next time that I encountered any sort of artifact of the Confederacy was when I went to Covington Square, like Devin did. And I saw the Confederate statue, and to be completely honest, I didn't have any sort of huge reaction to it. I understand what it stands for. I understand that the symbol of the Confederacy is hateful, and I understand that it's celebrating slavery and it's celebrating hating people who look like me, who look like Devin, who look like a number of people in this room. And I don't want to try to invalidate anyone's feelings about being angry or being scared or being frustrated when they see things like that, because those are completely valid feelings to have when you see something that is meant to represent hating you. But it just wasn't the reaction that I had. And I think it's because my dad has always told me growing up that you can either choose to be angry or you can choose to be happy, so you might as well be happy. And so that's what I did. But unfortunately, being happy can only go so far. And I remember it was either towards the end of my first semester or in the beginning of second semester, there was a rally going on in front of the Confederate statue, trying to keep it in its place. And I think my boyfriend drove past it sort of jokingly, but that was one of the first few times I think I've been conscious enough to like be uncomfortable in my own skin around other people. So that was that. We moved past it, or we at least attempted to. And the last thing that I sort of stumbled upon by myself was Kitty's Cottage, but I would like to refer to her as Catherine Boyd, because that is her name. And what happened with me was I was going on a walk, but it had just rained the day before, so it was a little bit muddy, and I didn't want to go start next to the Confederate graveyard or the soldiers' graveyard because I didn't want to get my boots all dirty. And so I walked down to the old church, and I walked past the church and towards the nature trail, and I saw the plaque, and I read it, and I was incredibly confused because at the time I thought that this was something that Emory owned, and I didn't understand why they would have something that was so whitewashed and just spun the narrative in a way that sort of romanticized and made slavery look like it was a good thing and like it was something that Catherine Boyd had wanted, because I just think that it was such an awful way to put the story. And even now, I'm still confused as to why the plaque exists, because the greater Oxford Covington area was also built on the backs of slave labor, and hiding that reality and whitewashing their stories neglects an integral part of the history of the community that's composed of nearly 50% African American individuals. And so from there is when I started talking to Devin about these experiences that I had. And that's really where my story with discovering these things ended until we started talking about the symposium.
So I think from hearing both my story and Sarah's story, you can see that there's some commonalities, but there's a lot of differences. So the first thing that we really wanted to do was get a sense of how other students on campus felt about this. And we actually had a survey that we sent out, and we mostly had members of the Black Student Alliance respond to this. We essentially wanted to gauge how aware people were of a lot of these physical monuments, along with any sort of thoughts or reflections they had about Emory's history and legacy, and kind of gauge how satisfied they were essentially with how Emory has acknowledged it so far. So with this, we wanted to also have participants be able to speak about their own perspectives, and that's where we contacted Austin, who will now share a little bit more about what he thought.
All right, thank you, Devin. Similar to Sarah and Devin, I also was born in Texas, Killeen, Texas, but I moved to Georgia when I was very little, so I only have memories from when I was in Georgia. And I know growing up in Atlanta, Georgia specifically, we learned a lot about Black culture in regards to the Civil Rights era, regarding the Confederacy and the Union. So I had prior information on these sort of topics, but I was unaware of how integral it was to Emory's history. So that really wasn't in my mind at the time when I was thinking about applying to Emory and going to Emory. I only saw it as a prestige school, mainly for its medical prowess, and wanting to be in an area where I would feel safe, and especially since it was the outbreak of COVID during that time, I didn't want to go anywhere that was too far away from my home, just close enough where I could be able to stay in contact with my loved ones while also still having that independence. So when I did come for a movement day like the rest of the panel, I did notice a large gap when it came to the diversity, specifically just the population of Black people on campus. It did make me feel almost secluded and unrecognized because of the fact that everywhere I turned, I would see people that did not look like me. Therefore, I would feel as if I can communicate myself effectively with people that had no experiences similar to mine. And my first experience with the racial inequality historical part of Emory was when I came across the graveyard or cemetery on the nature trail. I was walking there with a couple of friends, and we noticed the cemetery. It was a bit creepy at first, and then when we got more information regarding that it was of the Confederate soldiers, my initial feeling was disappointment. I was disappointed. I had some level of anger, frustration, because of the fact that they still have this piece of history at the campus, and it made me feel uncomfortable with everything that I've learned and come to know about what it meant to have Black people in that historical reference, in that timeline. And so from that perspective, I felt as if it was necessary to do something about that, to take away the cemetery, because if I feel uncomfortable being in an area where there is Confederate soldiers that remind me that Black people weren't always looked upon, they were disregarded, I know that other people will also feel that same way. And my perspective of that historical site didn't really change until I had history classes on campus, specifically my Foundations in American Society and Cultures class and my American Civil Rights class with Professor Louis Fanyan. And with his class, I learned so much about history, not only just regarding the history of America, but also its relations to slavery, how racial inequality was always enveloped in the societal innovations. And so when looking back at those historical sites, I had to come to terms that it is still history. Even though I don't personally enjoy that side of history, I have to come to terms that it is part of Oxford's history, it's part of Emory's history. Therefore, they have to have that to signify that, yes, Confederacy was a part of Oxford's history. And so knowing this, I can feel better knowing that it will allow me to still continue my day. I don't have to necessarily like that fact, but I do have to come to accept it. And so I just love exactly how Sarah brought up too, that just being happy, regardless of the things that are around you, you still can remain happy. It doesn't necessarily have to change you as an individual, but it can change your perspective on certain things. And so I know that not everyone feels the same way about this. I know a lot of people may be a bit more angry at this historical site due to either past experiences or just a more emotional connection to these type of things. But I think that knowing that these things inspire or just have different effects on the person is crucial to understanding that regardless of this history, Oxford is still a community of diversity. It's definitely improved over the years regarding that diversity, as we do have a lot more minority students that come to campus. And so just understanding that history is history, and knowing that we cannot change that history, but we necessarily can improve on that history is the crucial part, I believe.
Thank you, Austin. So from Austin's response, it seemed to reflect a lot of what we found within the survey results from other students, a lot of this changing and evolving perspective, but there did seem to be this kind of overwhelming consensus that students were dissatisfied with the way Emory was currently handling this. And I think with that was that many students were actually finding these things out from their own investigations, or mostly their own conversations from students. And being a student on campus, hearing from what other students have to say about this, there are a lot of different rumors flying around, rumors that there's active sects of the KKK around campus, or that you go to a shop in Covington Square and you can lift a mat and find an engraving that says no colored people allowed. So there's a lot of different things swirling around when it comes to Emory's history on campus, and the fact that the university wasn't able to really come forward and acknowledge this prior to the symposium, really like on a consistent basis, is what we found to be especially problematic. But to kind of capture and encapsulate this idea of students informing other students, or this lack of open acknowledgement, we did decide to share a poem with you that Sarah will now share with us.
The following 9-line poem is called American History by Michael S. Harper. It was written in 1970, 7 years after the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. We chose this poem because it highlights how hidden certain aspects of American history are. This can easily be reflected onto the history of Emory University, because although slavery has been acknowledged by the university, the specifics of what happened are not clear to incoming students or to individuals living on campus. The poem reads as following. Those 4 black girls blown up in that Alabama church remind me of 500 Middle Passage blacks in a net underwater in Charleston Harbor, so redcoats couldn't find them. Can't find what you can't see, can you? So this poem has two examples from American history that at the time, and well, one of them is still not discussed, probably to its fullest extent, but at the time, the Alabama church bombing was not something that was super common to be talked about. And then also Middle Passage, which is referring to how enslaved people actually made it to America. Both two examples that were not talked about like I had just mentioned. But I feel like what we want to focus on mainly is the last two lines, can't find what you can't see, can you? Because it can be taken in two ways. One way is that you literally can't find these individuals if you're not looking for them. So if you don't look through the rubble, you won't be able to find these 4 girls who have just been murdered. And for the people who are now hiding in Charleston Bay, you won't be able to find them if you don't look underwater. But it can also be interpreted as if we don't look for Black suffrage, or if we don't look for suffrage in general in the world, we're not going to be able to find it because we're trying to focus on the positives instead of these things that are extremely, extremely negative. And so, just as this poem says that Black people are a part of American history, slavery will always be a part of Emory's history. We don't think that it's a good idea to try to erase that history because it's permanent and it's real. It's not something that can be just taken away from the narrative. And so, with that, I'm going to hand it back to Devin.
So I think this idea of Emory's history with this being permanent and real is especially important because a lot of these monuments are still around and students are still forced to confront this. So from the survey results, a lot of students were familiar with a lot of these locations. They, like us, stumbled upon it, and while some took it upon themselves to investigate more, a lot were just unsatisfied that these were here out in the open. So we wanted to kind of share with you a little bit of like a visualization of students' perspectives. So we have a bit of a word cloud that just encapsulates the emotions and thoughts of students. But overall, students felt uneasy, unsafe, upset, uncomfortable, and disappointed. And a lot that has to do with Emory's history with the Confederacy and slavery. A lot of students questioned their belongingness within this community as they felt that many were unsure how other students on campus or how the university itself really reflected on this. So we feel one of the suggestions on how Emory can improve moving forward with this is really have more of a concise and more of a regular way of announcing and kind of sharing its reflections and thoughts about its legacy and history with students. We feel this symposium is one way and an amazing opportunity for us to talk about this and have this discussion. But after this conversation doesn't go away because the history is permanent and real. And students next year who aren't here right now will have to encounter a lot of these things. So whilst what I found really interesting from the survey was that students themselves couldn't come to a consensus on what should be done moving forward. A lot of students did have the opinion that a lot of these things should be taken down, removed completely, while others feel that it's an important part of our history and it forces us to have these conversations. So while I don't think there's one answer to how we really move forward from this, I do think definitely how we share this information and how we acknowledge this information is something that needs to be addressed moving forward. But we did try to come with at least one approach we think beyond acknowledgement that we think Emory could take. And we feel like that conversation is kind of intertwined in a conversation of the state around campus and around the Oxford and Covington community. So I made an effort to speak with a lot of the current MLK scholars, who, if you're unfamiliar with, Oxford MLK scholars come from local Newton County high schools. So they're from this area and familiar with a lot of aspects of this area, along with Newton County residents, to try to better understand the community and basically the current state of how things are. And I think within this conversation is also relevant the phrase, Oxford is a bubble. While in the COVID response, this phrase, Oxford is a bubble, is nice because we're protected from the worst of the pandemic. I do think in a conversation about restorative justice, this phrase, Oxford being a bubble, is more harmful than anything else. We as an institution are only here as we sit here now because of the hard work and basically the denial of human rights from enslaved laborers. So while we're able to flourish from this and have the power and privilege that we do today, a lot of people in the surrounding communities, descendants, and even those who aren't descendants, are currently dealing with a number of issues that are characteristics of Newton County. So we feel that while Emory has a lot of resources, it's very necessary for those resources to be directed outwards to further support the community. So when we talk about what Emory could do beyond naming different buildings and enacting monuments is actual substantive change, especially in reaching out to the community. I know with scholarships and with previous symposiums, the conversation of providing more monetary compensation or more scholarships has always been brought up. While these haven't actually been enacted on, I do think a very achievable result from this symposium would be a promise to actually engage more and support the community. One of these ways, especially being with educational support, because a lot of high schools around this area suffer from not as enough resources and teachers as a lot of the people who actually come here have. So I do think that as an educational institution, Emory kind of owes it to its surrounding community, especially Oxford, to further support the schools and the students at those schools if it truly does value itself as a place of learning. So with that, that was kind of our first perspectives and insights into Emory and Oxford's history. We hope that you're able to get a little bit more of an idea of what students here on campus think, but we're also open to questions. So if there are any questions, we'll take those now.
Okay, in-person questions, you can use this mic.
Good morning. I'm Mark Auslander. I can't tell you how moved I am to hear this brilliant analysis that is so ethically grounded. It's the sort of thing we dreamed of. This is exactly the spot standing in now where J.P. Godfrey and I first met a little more than 20 years ago, right here when it was the old cafeteria, brought together by Hoyt Oliver, who was a professor, to strategize precisely what you're talking about, how to decolonize the city of Oxford and the campus. And to see the work you continue to do is extraordinary. You're exactly right, that those critical sites, the Confederate monument in Covington Square, and the Confederate cemetery, they really come together as sites of memory, especially through the actions of the United Daughters of the Confederacy in Newton County. We're talking late 1890s, early 20th century, precisely during the redemption period, when there's an active attempt by the white power structure in this county to steal black land, to disenfranchise African Americans post-Reconstruction. And that's why they really are a dagger in the heart of decency, of democracy, of any kind of civility. And they were part of a white nationalist attempt, as you well know, to sort of move black control, economic and political control. And so it's absolutely right to zero in on those things. But I'd also urge you to think about a few other sites. So at the time, the African American community asked the Oxford student body for help in decolonizing the city cemetery, which was terribly treated in the African American side, and those students very effectively campaigned for a renegotiation of the terms of the contract to guarantee that that African American grave sites would be well cared for, and things have come a long way on that. There's still more work to be done. But the site that they really wanted taken care of, and this is a really enormous failure by the city still, is the old Rosenwald School. This was a post-slavery African-American school under African-American control. The building was allowed to fall apart. The land has been leased by a private family to the city that now wants to take back that lease. It is terrible. That is such an important site of African-American historical memory. Your point that the future of the community of Newton County rests in education is absolutely right. We need to honor that educational history. And then finally, I would also challenge you, and this is perhaps controversial, but to my mind, the most egregious really example of enduring white racism is the institution of dueling. I mean, dueling emerges exactly in the same period, end of the 19th century, the redemption period. It's a clear evocation, to my mind, of the symbolism of those Knight Riders, the first Klan. And that's a reason that the secret organization of Dooley has particular historical connections to the Klan. And that dreadful statue, to my mind, on the main Emory campus, which you may have seen, that celebrates Dooley, which is all about an appropriation by racist whites of Afro-Caribbean religiosity of Baron Samedi, the Lord of the Crossroads, or Gede, used supposedly to terrify people of color through that symbolism of the Lord of the Crossroads, who's skeletal. That is a vile institution to my mind. And not everybody may agree, maybe it's evolved, but so this is just something I'm throwing out to consider working with the African-American community here in Oxford to safeguard that space of memory associated with that great educational institution, that Black-run school, the Rosenwald School, and to look carefully at Dooley and those difficult questions. But I commend you for your extraordinary work. I know your faculty must be extremely proud of you, and I know you're going to keep on pushing the institution forward. Thank you for everything you're doing.
First, I just have a comment from the chat. This is from Kathy Harmon Christian, and she just wanted to say that this panel is a model of what civil dialogue looks like: authenticity, truth-telling, differences of opinion spoken without debate. I am so uplifted by these students and what they have said, as well as what they have modeled. I hope there are faculty and staff consortiums happening in a similar way. Well done. And then we have a question as well. And so this was from Betsy Collins, and she asked, does Emory have a role in ensuring that a whitewashed version of our state's history is not taught in public education? Are they working at the level of the State Board of Education? And that might have the greatest impact on Newton County and other public school districts. Don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
So I think that Emory does have a role in ensuring that students within this area are educated about kind of a more natural history beyond the whitewash version. I do think also that while students can spearhead a lot of these efforts, with the nature of Oxford being a two-year campus, there's such a frequent turnover that a lot of these projects kind of fall behind. So I do think there's a need for Emory to have staff members and faculty members that support a lot of these efforts, because we do, as students, we do have not only a lot of other responsibilities, but we do have to acknowledge that we won't be here for longer than 2 years to do a lot of these projects. So there is a need for Emory support on a lot of this, and I do think it would be appropriate to ensure that people are being educated appropriately.
I think you guys did a fabulous job. I am so impressed with you. But I have a question for you about your perceptions regarding Kitty's College. Would you feel differently about Kitty's Cottage if you knew that her family views it as a place to come to celebrate her endurance and the fact that although she died very young, her children lived full lives, and her great-great-great-grandchildren have an opportunity to come back to that site and honor her? Would that make a difference to you?
I can start off and then Sarah can continue if she would like. But I do think that while we don't have a problem with Kitty's Cottage itself, as we feel like for those
We can scratch the signs.
Yeah.
And just leave it to the truth.
Yes, I do think the plaques are the most problematic part about it in the way that it presents it. What needs to change is not Kitty's Cottage itself, but how we talk about it, especially how it's memorialized on the physical objects in front of it.
I view it as a place that we can celebrate the endurance of the slaves that worked the campus. And I say that to you because I'm one of her descendants. And so when I hear your thoughts about what reaction that you have, and there are other people from Oxford who have told me that they have the negative reactions. And my sentiment is, I understand how you can feel that way, but let's change the frame. Let's change the way that we look at it and not look at an opportunity to be sad at her plight and what may have occurred to her, but celebrate her life. So I just wanted to throw that out to you as you talk about the various sites on campus and how we view them. That's all. Thank you. You're fabulous.
Thank you.
So this question is from John Bentz, and it's, what would be the best way to communicate Emory's connections to slavery and the Confederacy to incoming students? Do students want to read something, listen to a presentation, take a class?
I personally think that the best way for Emory to acknowledge what has happened here on campus is for the plaques. I'm not sure if Devin actually shares the same sentiments with that, but I think that if it is a class, it's not necessarily something that's accessible to all students. There's only going to be so many people who can take a class like that. And so having plaques, not like the plaques that are surrounding Kitty's Cottage, or sorry, Captain Boyd's Cottage, but the plaques that share the story in a way that is not romanticized, is not trying to say that it was a good thing that this happened. Plaques that are just frankly telling the story straight, how it was. And I think that is probably the best thing that the university could do for it.
I also think there's an opportunity at orientation events, because at orientation we talk a lot about mottos and the alma mater and Dooley itself, but I do think this is also part of who we are as an institution and as a school, so this should be presented in some form in orientation, as that's what orientation is for.
So I think what you guys have been speaking about is really important, and it really has like opened my eyes to things that like have happened just this past week. Like last Wednesday, I had a yoga class, and we walked into the cemetery, and we sat there, and we literally meditated. Like, and now that I'm looking back on it, like that was crazy. Like all the people down there literally are symbols of hate, and all these students were asked to sit there and meditate. So I wanted to ask you guys, like, what role you think faculty has to play in like this sort of education at our school here?
I think it's very easy to be desensitized by the fact that it is a Confederate cemetery, by the fact that it's right on campus, and that no one talks about it besides like, oh, it's a Confederate cemetery, as Sarah mentioned. I do think if we have more conversations about it, people might realize that it's not just a place, it's not just another place on campus, but I know Sarah has thoughts a lot about the cemetery itself.
I think that when it comes to the cemetery, I sort of have problems with meditating on it in general, because that's a place where people are resting, and I'm not sure if that's the most appropriate thing to do. But in regards to that, I think that there needs to be more of a discussion about the cemetery. I mean, as I said in my story, it wasn't something that was discussed with me. And I think that probably if it shouldn't be the students who are talking about it, it should probably be the faculty. It should probably be coming from the faculty and staff. Because I don't think that it should be students' responsibility once they come here and realize how deep the connections to slavery are, is that they should have to go and do their own research on what's happening, like we did for the symposium. I think that it should be something that's accessible to everyone. And then, like I said, since these other people, there's a lot of turnover, like Devin was saying. Since the staff and faculty here, there isn't as much turnover, not every 2 years like with us. We can't inform everyone on what's happening here on campus. It probably should be faculty and staff.
Hi, folks. I want to echo the appreciation for your voices that others have said. And for those of you who know me, I have a higher exposure to the stress that students face, given that I'm one of the counselors for the Counseling Center. And I guess one of the questions that I have, but both for you and for the entire community, and it's really in the context of the complexity of the last couple of questions, and it really comes from this dilemma that we so benefit from, critically need your voices, if not your activism, because that's where so much change comes from as students. And while we're discussing the legacy of slavery, how do we manage the tension, and how do we support you? Because I'm aware that you're also RAs, you're executive officers of organizations, attending a university that is known for its academic rigor, and you're tired. How do we help you as members of the folks who are paid here to not slip into this space where we relate to you as unpaid consultants? I just want to get your thoughts on that.
That's a question that is making me think. I would say being open to a conversation if the student wants to have it about a lot of these things is important. I think I do need to really reflect and think about what would be the best way, as it's been difficult so far and I'm not sure how exactly I want to be supported. But it is something that I want to keep in mind, so thank you. But I think with that, that was our last question for the time we were allotted here today, so thank you everyone for listening to us. Oh, there's one more question.
And yes, this will be our last question. And this is from Jill Moore-Haslam, and she was wondering, how are students welcome in the towns of Oxford and Covington and known? In our student perspectives, part of these conversations beyond the Oxford campus walls, are like, how are they changing the energy in such conversations?
I will say, in the surrounding community, students are welcome. There's not a major unwelcoming presence. There's events with rallies, as Sarah was mentioning, where I think students really start feeling uncomfortable, but on a day-to-day basis, there is not much conflict. So yeah, I think that's at least my perception of it. Thank you, everyone.